All right, we're looking at two of the most popular combo kits in the 2 1/4 horsepower category, and I've had these in my shop for years. In fact, I have multiples of both of these models, the Dewalt 618 versus the Bosch 1617. What are the ins and outs, the quirks, the good and bad and ugly of these? We'll get into all the details, including what accessories are available for these kits. All right, let's start with the 618 first. And when I first bought into this system, I got the 3-base kit. Now that one includes the D-base as well. But I think for most people, they're going to be happy with the 2-base kit. If you at least get the 1 motor and the 2 bases, that'll give you a lot of options. On the fixed base, it really has a low squat stance, and it's really easy to hold and use for edge profiling. I thought actually this would be the #1 thing that I used was the fixed base. But as it turned out, the plunge base is so good on this kit, this is really my go-to tool when I'm doing mortises or inlay work. The plunge action is really smooth on this one, and I've never had it stick in the down position. Now these routers were originally ELU designs, and when Dewalt picked up the patent for those, I think their whole fleet of routers really improved. Both of the routers we're looking at today are 2 1/4 horsepower, and they're variable speed. And I think that's a really important feature to have. Sometimes, depending on the size of your bit, you want to dial that speed back a little bit so you just maintain good control at all times. But, unless you're looking at the 616 version of this, which is a single speed unit, the 618 will come with variable speed. Pretty early in the discussion, we've got to talk about dust collection. Now, there's a cap that you can close off the system if you're not going to use a dust extractor, but this through-the-column dust extraction is so thoughtfully integrated into the tool, there's no reason not to use it. All you do is just insert a little plastic shroud that just snaps in place around the bit, and then you can hook up your dust extractor, and for any inboard cut, this really has excellent dust collection. Now for the fixed base that we'll talk about in a minute, there's no dust collection accessory offered for that base, so you'll be limited to aftermarket accessories if you want to have dust collection when doing edge profiling. Now the plunge depth is controlled by a turret. This is a 5-stop depth turret, all of which are adjustable thanks to an adjustable lead screw on the tip of the depth stop rod, and that's really my preferred mechanism. And if you have something like that, you don't have to get out a screwdriver or an Allen wrench to make fine adjustments. It's just a little thumb screw, and thankfully they've put a spring on the shaft of that screw, and that way if you're not using the plunge rod, if it's not up against the turret, it's not going to vibrate loose or change positions. The weight of the 618 in a plunge base is a little bit more than when it's in the fixed base, but it seems really in line with other plunge routers I've used in this category. The handles are an overmolded rubber design, and they really feel good in the hands. In fact, the handles on this 618 router are really one of the best I've used on any mid-size router. The on and off switch is really basic. I can reach it with my thumb from the handles, but I wouldn't say it's the most convenient position. It's one of the problems with just about any 2-base combo kit. We lost those triggers in the handles like we used to have with any dedicated plunge router. There's really only one router on the market now that solves that issue in a combo kit, and that's the Bosch MRC23. You can look elsewhere for my reviews on that product. Now the latch that locks the motor in place is a little bit short, and that's real typical for most routers. Sometimes I wish they were a little bit longer. The router that I really think got that right was the Porter Cable 890, but this system works fine, and once it's loose, you just pull it straight up and out. Now that's a system I really appreciate because it's simpler than some other designs. Of course, you'll have the ability to use 1/4 inch or 1/2 inch bits, and on previous router kits, I've noticed that this came with a dedicated 1/4 inch collet as well as a 1/2 inch collet. Now on this latest kit, I noticed they changed that, and you get a 1/2 inch collet and then a 1/4 inch collet sleeve. And I'm really not a fan of that, so I would contact Dewalt and see if you could add to your list of accessories a dedicated 1/4 inch collet. So when you're switching over to the fixed base, you'll need this ring that comes with the kit, and the idea is you just thread that onto the motor a ways, and that's what will let you snap that into position. Now when you're installing this into the fixed base, there's a little track and then pins in the base, so you have to pay attention of the orientation of your router as you pop that into place. One of the things I judge a router on is how easily I can set the bit depth very precisely, and even though this adjustment ring is fairly coarse, I've never had any trouble adjusting the bit depth just where I need it. It's got a detachable cord, and that's one feature I really like. You can just quickly rotate the cord and release it from the motor for bit changes or maintenance. And I think it's one feature that really gives it a high-end feel, makes it more on par with more expensive routers. The D-base is a perfect complement for this system with the detachable cord. It just inserts at the bottom of the handle here, and in this base only you get a trigger in the handle, and that is lockable in the on position, so that's nice for longer cuts. One negative is this base can feel a little bit tippy if you're not aware that the bottom of the handle isn't flush with your workpiece, but there's a nice offset. The D handle and the standard handle are at a bit of an angle, so that gives you good control when you're edge profiling. Otherwise, the adjustment controls are just like the fixed base. Let's switch over to the 1617 fixed base, and as we do, just take a note of the overall size of these two units. I've set these just where you'd have them if you were routing a board, and note that the Dewalt does sit a little bit lower, and although the weight is similar, the Dewalt feels lower and more compact in the hand. Just something I've noted using these routers side by side. The fixed base gives you a classic design with the wooden handles, and they can be a little bit slippery when they're covered with dust, and they do sit fairly low on the router, which normally I would say would be a plus, but there's not quite enough room for the hands underneath the handles, so your hands kind of touch across the surface of the board as you route. That's just a matter of preference, I guess, whether you like that. It is kind of a proprioceptive feel. You always feel like you're in touch and control with the work you're doing, but I just wish there was a little bit more room for hand space under those knobs. Just like the other kit, this one comes with variable speed, and the switch is not very reachable from the handle. It feels like you have to remove one hand to activate the power switch, and that's pretty typical with the combo kits. As far as releasing this, again, I wish this lever was just a little bit longer. Seems like it would be more ergonomic that way, but there's quite a bit of slop and slack in this lever, but I realize with all the kits that I have that are Bosch 1617s, they're all this way, so it's nothing wrong with your router. It's just a design that when it's open, it's going to feel a little bit loose, but once you buckle that, it'll be secure. And then once the latch is open, you push a button to raise the base up, and then you rotate it to remove it from the motor. That's an extra step I wish you didn't have to do to swap out bases, but if the 1617 is your primary router, it's something that you certainly get used to. Now here you get 1/4 inch and 1/2 inch dedicated collets, so kudos to Bosch for sticking with that. Their collet wrenches are pretty nice too. You get 2 wrenches that are cast rather than a stamped steel, and they're a little bit easier on the hands than the flat wrenches offered by other manufacturers. On the Bosch, it's a 2-wrench bit changing system. There's no collet lock there. On the Dewalt, you can take your pick, either to press the collet lock and use a single wrench, or you can use 2 wrenches, although in some kits it only includes 1 wrench, so you may have to pick up a spare. The bit height adjustment has really fine threads, and I suppose there's good and bad to that. It does help you make really precision adjustments on your fixed base, but it can make things a little bit slow and tedious to adjust. You also might not have the ability to run through the full vertical movement available without first pressing that coarse release button. Just press that as needed. You can raise up to a higher or lower starting position and fine adjust from there. From there, you can lock your lever, which is just the same as your other base, and you can start to look at some of the features on this plunge action. So here it's locked into position until I press the lever to release it. The plunge action is really smooth and fairly light compared to other routers, so I think that's enjoyable to use. The only time I've ever had this stick in the down position is when I'm working off the edge where the router is partially unsupported, and I did have that issue initially. What I found really helped with that is if I removed the factory grease from the plunge rods and actually applied a dry lubricant instead. We'll link to any of the helpful products in the description box. There's a nice fold down chip shield. That seems to be good. It doesn't get in your way or obscure your visibility. There's an 8-step turret, which I really like that, but I think the 8 steps might be kind of overkill. That gives you, each step is about 1/8 of an inch different, and I really don't see myself doing mortises advancing 1/8 at a time. I think 1/4 inch is probably more logical for the type of work I do. That said though, it does have that adjustment on the tip of the stop rod, and that's the style I prefer because it makes all of those steps adjustable. The one issue I did have with that stop is it tends to rotate when it's not touching the turret. That's a problem because the next time you go to plunge to that same depth setting, you won't have an equal depth. And the way I got around that was to replace the O-ring in that mechanism with a slightly thicker one. I also took a pair of pliers and slightly marred the threads to give it just a little more friction so it won't rotate loose when you're using it. Now the 1617 does have external springs on the plunge rods, and that requires dust shields, and those make it look a little more old school, not quite as modern looking as some of the other routers in this class, but functionally it really does the job, and I think this would go toe-to-toe with a lot of routers on the market. Now comparing these two head-to-head, specifically in the plunge base, I'd have to give it to the Dewalt by a nose, and I think that integrated dust collection has a lot to do with it, and just the modern feeling plunge rods on that. Overall though, both of these routers do a pretty good job in the plunge base, so it may just come down to how you see yourself using the kit. Now in the fixed base, both of these routers are really neck and neck. Performance-wise, they both do a great job. If you're looking at ergonomics, I'd have to give the nod to the Dewalt because it sits a little bit lower and the handles are just the right size and they have that comfortable overmolded feel. As far as the way that you set the bit depth, I'd have to give the nod to the Bosch. There it seems a little more precise with the fine threaded rod versus the coarser adjustment on the Dewalt. Now I've had both of these routers in a router table, and without a dedicated lift, just using its own fixed base, both of them have the same issue. Basically the collet doesn't extend far enough above the router table to make bit changes easy. It is a workable thing. You can do occasional work in the router table. If you just want to swap into a fixed base once in a while, it does work. There's no issues with it, but it's just not very convenient when it comes to bit changes. Now, if you do have a dedicated lift and you're wondering which one of these would be best, I would give the nod to the 1617. Loads of people have used this in a lift and it really holds up well over time. Both Bosch and Dewalt make really excellent accessories. Their edge guides, for instance, are two of the best on the market. These are wonderful if you're doing a little mortising or if you need to follow an outside edge to guide the bit. Dust collection on the Bosch is by means of these bolt-on accessories. They have one for the plunge base, one for the fixed base, and yet a third option for collecting dust down below the router if you're doing edge profiling. In testing, I did find the dust collection on the Bosch worked quite well. It's just not quite as integrated as the solution the Dewalt has for the plunge base. However, on the fixed base on the Bosch, you will have dust collection where that's just absent on the fixed base Dewalt. So with the Dewalt, you can accept the standard Porter cable style guide bushings with one sub base, and another sub base is included with a larger opening for big bits. Now on the Bosch, you won't be able to accept the standard guide bushings without a separate adapter kit, which is available separately. This has an adapter to let you use their proprietary guide bushings, or yet another adapter ring that fits inside the first to accept standard Porter cable guide bushings. Well, thanks for stopping by the Thoughtful Woodworker shop. If you think you're ready to pull the trigger on a new router, drop down to the description box of this video. Take a look at some of the links there. We've got the best deals listed on brand new kits, both the Bosch and the Dewalt, available in kits or as single base routers. Thanks so much for watching. Hope to see you on the next one.